Welcome to HempLogic Radio, where we attempt to sift facts from opinions in this upside-down world of industrial hemp.
Hey, good morning. It's Corey with HempLogic and my BFH, my better half, Beth Sharp. She's on the line with us. Good morning, Beth.
Good morning. Good morning. How is everybody today?
Everybody's good. I know I'm good. Bill, you good?
Good.
Yes, we're good over here. Thank you.
Good.
Just a quick note, everyone. This is a live show. I don't do any editing onto this. This is actually just where the program Blog Talk Radio. It's a live program, so everything you hear everything's not edited. So today we've got Bill Bullard. He is the Chief Executive Officer of RCAF USA. And he's a cattleman from way back. And today we wanted to touch on, it's a very important topic, and it falls into some of the things I've been talking about as far as our food chain, but it's a country of origin. And I don't know if everybody understands that there was some laws passed, and Bill will talk about these, I'm sure, that they took away the country of origin. So when you buy meat at your local store, you don't know exactly what country it's coming from. Is that right, Bill? Bill Bullard, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Corey. And yes, that's absolutely right.
Can you give us a little history on this? I know that until you read about it, if you're not interested in it, I'm sure it's a boring topic. But can you give us a little history on this whole thing?
Well, sure. Let's go back to the early 90s when our country fell into this globalization effort, and we began to see that our country was actually trying to encourage more imports of food from other countries. And for our industry, we began seeing increased volumes of imports that were being purchased cheaper in foreign countries, brought into the United States, and then sold to unsuspecting consumers as if it was a product of the United States of America. And the reason consumers believe that is because all beef, whether imported or produced domestically, is required to be marked with the USDA's safety seal. So there's a USDA safety sticker on all beef products, but that sticker does not denote origin. And consumers would believe that it did. And therefore, the multinational global meat packers were making windfall profits by sourcing beef cheaper from these foreign countries and then passing it off to unsuspecting consumers as if it were a domestic product. And of course, it was priced accordingly. So the meat packers were making windfall profits. So we got together back in the early 2000s with other farmers of fruits and vegetables, nuts and peanuts, even fishermen. And we worked as a coalition to pass in the U.S. Congress the mandatory country of origin labeling law, and it was passed in 2002. And that law required all chicken and beef and pork and goat meat and venison and lamb and fish and shellfish and all fresh fruits and vegetables and peanuts and macadamia nuts and ginseng. All of those commodities were required by law to be labeled as to where they were grown or produced. And for all meat products, they were, excuse me?
I said, I didn't know any of this.
Okay. I didn't want to, okay. So all meat products were required to be labeled as to where they were born, raised, and slaughtered. And the USA label was reserved exclusively for products that were exclusively born, raised, and slaughtered. So that was passed in 2002, and immediately the multinational meat packers came unglued and they regrouped, and they actually convinced Congress to delay the implementation of that law for the meat products for cattle and pork and chicken and lamb for about 7 years. And so it wasn't until 2009 that they actually implemented this for meat products. And it was only partially implemented because of the tremendous influence by these multinational meat packers. They did not want consumers to be able to distinguish meat that was exclusively produced by America's cattle farmers and ranchers from the meat that was imported, produced from imported live cattle from Canada and Mexico, and then simply just slaughtered here in America. So they fought and won the opportunity to have a mixed country label. And so for a few years, from 2009 to 2013, when consumers went to the grocery store, they'd see a label that said product of the United States, Mexico, and Canada. So they still couldn't choose to support America's farmers and ranchers, nor could they choose to buy beef produced under the most stringent health and safety standards in the world, and that's right here in America. And so we had these mixed country labels for several years. But then the meat packers worked with Canada and Mexico, foreign countries that wanted to continue importing or exporting to the United States undifferentiated and cheaper beef. Those countries filed a complaint at the international tribunal known as the World Trade Organization. And unsurprisingly, the World Trade Organization agreed with Canada and Mexico that the United States should not be distinguishing food products for consumers. So they ruled against the United States, but the U.S. Department of Agriculture did something very good at that time. They rewrote the regulations then, and they actually fully implemented COOL in May of 2013, because at that point, all beef sold in U.S. grocery stores was required to be labeled as to where it was born, raised, and slaughtered. And so beginning in May of 2013, consumers could choose to buy beef that was exclusively produced right here in America. Well, then the meat packers and the countries of Canada and Mexico pushed even harder at the World Trade Organization and said, that's even worse. Allowing consumers to know precisely where their meat came from was not in their economic interest. So they convinced the World Trade Organization to issue another ruling that essentially said that the COOL law discriminated against live animal imports from Canada and Mexico, and therefore Congress either had to substantially change the law or they had to repeal it. Well, the meat packers are so powerful in Washington that Congress fell all over itself just to repeal the law. So in December of 2015, that's what happened. Congress repealed country of origin labeling, but only for beef and pork. So today, consumers can go to the grocery stores and still find chicken, lamb, and fruits and vegetables and nuts, all labeled with a sticker that says product of the United States, product of Chile, product of China, Taiwan, whatever country. And consumers can exercise choice in the grocery stores, but they can no longer know where their beef comes from. And to make matters worse, when the country of origin labeling law was repealed by Congress, it repealed a provision in the law that required these multinational meat packers and importers to retain the foreign label on foreign products all the way through retail sale, meaning all the way to consumers. That was repealed. And we reverted back to the pre-2002 era where the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, was actually facilitating more imports from more countries into the United States. And what they did was they treated the imported product as if it were an American product as soon as it crossed U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And the USDA is allowing today meat packers to import meat from any one of the 20 countries we import from: Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Uruguay, Argentina, Brazil, New Zealand, Australia, Mexico, Canada, Ireland. We import from about 20 countries. And that imported product is allowed to enter the United States in a box and then go through a U.S. processing plant, be unboxed, reboxed, and relabeled. And the old foreign label, say label country of origin of Uruguay, was thrown in the garbage, and a new label that said product of the USA is attached. So the consumers are being terribly deceived right now in the grocery stores, because some of the product that even bears a USA label is exclusively a foreign product. The only thing that's American is it's got some American plastic wrapped around it and an American label. So our efforts right now are to restore country of origin labeling so consumers can choose under what country's food safety regime they want their beef and pork produced under, as well as to allow consumers to be able to choose the American economy by supporting our American farmers and ranchers. And the only way they can do that is if we fully restore country of origin labeling for beef and pork, so consumers can make that choice. And also important from our perspective as a representative of the cattle industry, these meat packers can currently import this or source their beef products and their cattle from these other foreign countries, bring it into the United States market, and displace domestic production. And that's what's happening today. U.S. cattle farmers and ranchers marketplace has been displaced with undifferentiated, cheaper imports, and the American cattle and farmer and rancher can't do a thing about it, because once they sell their live animals, they have no control in the rest of the multi-segmented beef and pork supply chains. So we are fighting right now to restore mandatory country of origin labeling for beef and pork and for dairy products. We just added dairy products in a campaign that we just kicked off yesterday, and that's a petition in which we need to get 100,000 signatures in 30 days to deliver to the president, to the White House, so that he will take action along with Congress. And in just 24 hours, we kicked this campaign off yesterday morning at 8 o'clock. In 24 hours, we had 20,000 signatures. So we're well on our way to get 100,000 signatures. And people can go right now to www.demandUSAbeef.com. It's www.demandUSAbeef.com. And they can sign the petition and help us restore mandatory country of origin labeling for beef, pork, and for dairy products, so consumers can make buying decisions based on who they want to support and what country they have the most confidence in producing the safest, wholesomest, and best beef and pork in the world, bar none.
Well, I think that's a really long explanation, and it's like, okay, all right, that's a lot to unpack. But I don't think, and just like I've been talking about the last 3 weeks about our food chain, this is definitely a part of the food chain that people don't really understand when they go to the grocery store. I just happen to, both Beth and I grew up on, been on farms, so we kind of understand the cattle raising part of it. But when you go to the grocery store and you buy a steak, and now, I saw the difference in changing of labels, and I noticed that because I've been reading up on it, but the average consumer has no idea that steak that they just bought could have come from Uruguay.
Somewhere else, yeah.
So I'm thinking, Bill, I'm actually thinking that this coronavirus might help your cause.
Well, as a result of not being able to compete in our own marketplace, because we do not have mandatory country of origin labeling as the law today, our industry has been shrinking and shrinking fast. We are the largest segment of American agriculture, the U.S. cattle industry. We have just over 750,000 independent cattle producers scattered all across the United States. And they're the ones who raise the cattle. They breed their cows to the bull, or the bulls to the cows, and then they have a calf once a year, and then they raise that calf for about 4 to 6 months, and then it goes to the next segment of the live cattle supply chain, and it's essentially producers who keep those animals as year-old animals, and then the animal goes into the third segment of the live cattle supply chain, and that's the feedlot segment, where the animals are fed for about 120 days on a grain diet, and they're brought to slaughter weight, and then the animal is sold to the meat packer to be harvested into a consumable beef product. And that takes about 15 to 18 months from the time that the animal is born until the animal is sold to the meat packer to be converted into a consumable beef product. So the supply chain that we have in our industry has been shrinking. We've lost hundreds of thousands of cattle producers just in half a lifetime. We've lost over 500,000 since 1980, and the trajectory continues to be downward. And then when I talked about the globalization effort of the 90s, essentially what our government has done is turned over the entire food system to these global companies. And these multinational corporations have shaped both the structural framework of the industry and the legal framework of the industry in order to maximize their shareholder profits without regard to the interest of our nation for food security and food safety. And so what we have done is we've skeletonized our system. We've allowed the packers to eliminate all the small and mid-sized packers, where today the 4 largest meat packers control 85% of all cattle that are ready to be slaughtered as fed animals. That's a tremendous level of concentration. 85% controlled by 4 companies.
That
Two
was
of
what
those companies.
I was going to bring that up. I was going to bring that up because we, born and raised in Moses Lake. There was a little small packing plant there in Moses Lake. We had our auction house and the packing plant, and then there was one in Ellensburg, like an hour away. Well, both those places are gone. They've been gone. So I'm sure the packing. When did that start happening, Bill? When did the small packing plants and was that government? Did they push them out because of government, or was that pushed out just because of economics?
Well, they were pushed out because the largest meat packers were supporting regulatory regimes that they could comply with, but it was very difficult for a small to mid-sized packer to meet, the same costly requirements. And in fact, for many small and mid-sized operations, the requirements were unnecessary for them. They were only necessary because these plants were getting so big. And so it was very difficult for these small to mid-sized packers to comply because they had to meet regulatory requirements that were designed by and for the largest meat packers. And that happened throughout the mid to late 80s and throughout the 90s. In fact, we call that period, and even USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, refers to that period as merger mania, because that's when we allowed the industry to consolidate and become so concentrated that you now have those 4 packers. And importantly, 2 of them are Brazilian-owned. 2 of the nation's 4 largest meat packers, one is owned by JBS, which is the world's largest meat packer, and the other owns the controlling interest of our 4th largest meat packer, and that's the Marfrig meat packing company out of Brazil, which is the 2nd largest global meat packer in the world. So we are now dependent on an industry that has become skeletonized. It lacks resiliency. It lacks redundancy. It is highly centralized. And if you close one plant or slow production in one plant, you will begin to back up the system. And that's what the COVID virus situation is showing us right now. These monolithic meat packers were incapable of responding to a closed meatpacking plant or a slowed production system because their workers were becoming ill. If we had a disaggregated system, food system, that would be inherently more secure for the nation because a crisis in one area could simply be absorbed by another. But the way we are so highly concentrated today, we can't do that. And the meat packers in our industry are trying to vertically integrate the industry. And what that means is they're trying to kill competition throughout the live animal production chain. And they've done that already in the poultry and hog industries. They now control the entire industry from the time of the egg, in the case of chicken, or the case of a piglet being born. They control that animal from the time it's born or hatched all the way through to the consumer. And they've eliminated competition, and they've wiped out, in the case of the hog industry, 90% of all the hog producers in business just half a lifetime ago in 1980 are gone today. We wiped out 90% of them. And so what the meat packers were doing when they were shaping this industry to their benefit, their economic benefit, they realized it was far easier to manage 68,000 hog farmers than it was to manage 664,000 hog farmers. And so now that they've controlled those industries, when they back up, unlike in the cattle industry, which is really the vertical integrators' last frontier where we still have independent producers, as our system backs up, we can hold cattle back. As long as the producer has the financing available to continue feeding, you can hold cattle back and wait out this blockage, the bottleneck that's occurred in our packing structure. But for these vertically integrated systems in the hog and poultry industry, they can't do that. They're so highly concentrated, and now what we're hearing is reports that they're starting to kill pigs and chickens because they can't get them processed.
I read that they're starting to kill pigs, that they have no home for them. And somebody put a post on one of my LinkedIn, and he said, "Well, I know this might not work, but is there any way I could get one of those hogs?" And I'm responding to the fact of, no, because you're talking about truckload after truckload after truckload of hogs ready to be butchered. They can't stop what they're doing. I mean, even it would cost them more. They won't even let you do it because they're not going to let you on the farm, number one. And even if they were to give you the hog, there's no way to get that hog into your truck, or, everyone wants to, that they want that bag of potatoes or that bag of onions, but it's not. Our food system is not set up that way. And
well, that's right.
It's frustrating. I get in fights with people all the time, especially the ones that think that, the solution is urban farming. We've got to start planting gardens in the cities. And that doesn't solve the other 8 million or billion people we have to feed,
Right.
And I don't know, it's in concept, and it's, you could say, the argument is it's big ag and they're taking, the profits over, everything else. But in reality, aren't we still feeding? We're still trying to feed 8 billion people throughout the world. Big ag is still responsible for feeding a large portion of that. The small farmers can, if you take our small little town, which, it's not small anymore, but when I first moved there, it was 8,000 people, had its own meat packing plant. It had its own auction house. It had its own, distribution of food products and produce and whatnot. Now everything's shifted. The biggest potato I think they're building another big potato place, and it's an hour and 20 minutes away. But it's, we're talking, truckloads of potatoes coming from 3 hours away will come to this plant.
Right. So,
I don't know
until the changes, until the changes really began to manifest themselves in our industry back in the mid to late 80s and the 90s, and then on through today, where we have simply pursued this goal of efficiency and economies of scale, and thinking that we could feed the world on this basis. And that's where we made our mistake, because we didn't consider the fact that we needed to make sure that the industry was resilient and had redundancy and could withstand shocks. Instead, we let the meat packers continue that argument that they are more efficient than anyone else. Well, the fact of the matter is the United States family farm system of agriculture that consisted of millions of farmers and had, hundreds of thousands of processing plants and distribution outlets. That was the most efficient and effective food system in the world, bar none. The family farm system of agriculture was the envy of the world. And no better model has ever been produced. But the multinational globalists believed they had a better model, and everybody bought into it. And that's why we have this skeletonized system today. And so we have far surpassed economies of scale. We have far surpassed efficiencies. What we've done now is created tremendous buying power in the part of these multinational corporations to control the entire industry. That's what's happened. We surpassed the economy of scale that would have balanced the national security interest, the national food safety interest, and the interest of being able to respond in the time of any type of a crisis. And now we're dependent upon a system that is fundamentally broke. The market system is broken, and here's how we know that, and that is that since January 1 of 2015, cattle prices began to collapse. They collapsed further and faster than at any time in history. But retail beef prices continued to escalate. And in fact, they rose for another 8 months and reached a historic high. Consumers were paying an historic high price for beef 8 months after cattle prices collapsed. And from that point forward, we saw cattle prices continue to collapse. In fact, for the past 3 years, from 2017 to today, we see a marked trend, downward trend in cattle prices, and at the same time, we see a marked upward trend in consumer beef prices. So what's happening here is there's been a complete disconnect between the value of the cattle that the American farmer and rancher receives and the value of beef that consumers must pay if they want beef. And this has created a situation where the meat packers have been earning record margins. In other words, they're making windfall profits off the back of the cattle producers on one end of the supply chain and the consumers on the other. And that is a fundamentally broken market. It's manifest market failure, and we've been trying to prevent the situation, the dire situation we're in today, for the past 10 years. And in fact, 1 year ago yesterday, April 23rd, 2019, we filed an historic class action antitrust lawsuit against each of the big four packers, Tyson, Cargill, JBS, and National Beef, and that's the one that Marfrig has a controlling interest in. We allege those four meat packers conspired. They violated the law by conspiring to artificially reduce prices paid to the American cattle farmers and ranchers while simultaneously inflating their own margins and profits. We allege they violated our U.S. antitrust laws. They violated our Packers and Stockyards Act that was passed by Congress specifically to protect the independent livestock producer from the market abuse and excesses of the highly concentrated meat packers. And we allege they violated the Commodity Exchange Act. So this is a historic case. And in this case, we allege that these packers have colluded in order to create the situation we're looking at now, a complete disconnect between the value of cattle. So we have producers today who have been trying to sell cattle for 4 weeks, but they have no one to buy their cattle. And these producers are unable to make their payments. So we're going to lose a lot more of the cattle producers, and we've already been witnessing an alarming decline in the number of our farmers and ranchers. And this is actually falling right into the hands of the globalists who want to reduce the number of participants because its smaller numbers are easier to manage. So we've got to reverse this. We've got to reverse it for America because we cannot become dependent on foreign countries for our food products. We have to rebuild our American food system.
I totally agree. And it comes back to the local. You know, it's going to come back to the local side, but you have to be able to get the restrictions, the regulatory stuff backed off, so you can actually, you know, I think somebody said it was, you know, at least $1 million. You know, the infrastructure to build out another slaughterhouse is astronomical. You know,
right.
and it takes time. I don't know what's going to happen, Bill. I'm being a farmer, I'm concerned about our food supply, and definitely meat has. There's a definite hole in our meat production, and what you've just talked about with the labeling, and then the farmer. I see it all the time. I'm on Twitter, and I'm connected with a couple farmers there, cattle guys, and they just, dairy farmers, cattlemen, they're just dying. They're just dying, and you can see it, even though it's just words, you can feel their anxiety and their, one dairy farmer's dumping milk.
Right.
And coming from a dairy farmer, I know what that feels like.
Yeah, we actually did that ourselves. So, I know how that is too. It's terrible.
So we can fix this. And when we first saw in the middle of March, when we first saw the reports of empty beef cases in grocery stores across America, our organization, RCAF USA, immediately built a web platform to connect consumers with those farmers and ranchers who do sell beef directly to the consumers, as well as to some of the small processing plants and butchers who can sell beef directly to consumers. So we set this and invited producers across the United States that if they sold beef to producers to put their contact information on this platform. The only requirement we have on that is that they must sell exclusively beef that is born, raised, and slaughtered in the United States. And so we put that out there, and then we did news releases through consumer groups in order to encourage consumers to come to that website, and they could do a search for the producers in their state that can sell beef directly to consumers. And right now we have over 300 producers from 40 states that are actually doing that, which is a higher number than we expected. We thought maybe we'd get 75 to 100 producers on that list. So consumers can go right now to www.usabeef.org. That's usabeef.org. And they can do a search and find producers in that area, local producers, who can provide beef. But as you said, that does not solve the industry's problem. We did that to just try to help help connect consumers to the wholesome beef product, and it's grown faster than what we thought. But the other thing we did is early in March, we sent a letter to the president and said, you need to work with these small to mid-sized packers that are currently under state jurisdiction. They're inspected by the respective state food safety systems. And right now, many of those state-inspected plants are not allowed to sell beef across state lines. And, of course, this helps those who control the marketplace who don't want competition, is to have a regulation that prevents smaller operations from expanding. This has gone on for decades. And so we've asked the president to streamline the process so these state-inspected plants can immediately begin shipping beef into commerce across state lines to help alleviate the bottleneck that is now clearly evident within the industry. And there's efforts in Congress underway to do that. There's what's called the PRIME Act right now, trying to provide an opportunity for these smaller local processing plants and butchers to expand their operations to help alleviate the bottleneck in this system. And that's what we need to do. We need to create an environment that is conducive to attracting new entrants. And obviously, this is a very profitable industry. You know, you've got some Tyson, Cargill, JBS, some of the most powerful corporations in the world are doing this because it's profitable. The problem is now we need to provide the opportunity for profits for the small to mid-sized operations so we can begin to rebuild the redundancy that we lack in our industry today.
Yeah, man, this is a big. I have a question while you were talking. So you were the I don't know what beef prices are today. I don't keep up on the actual beef price. But there was a guy that tweeted last night. There was a bull that came through with an auction house there in Toppenish, and he goes, I have to start rethinking my cutting steers this year because actually the bull made more money than the steer for slaughter. He just couldn't believe that was actually happening.
Yes.
So, and I'm sure that doesn't make any sense at all to a cattle rancher. But when a cow, let's put a price per pound on a steer going to slaughter, and then translate that to a pound of hamburger. when we say that the packers are inflating the cost to the consumers versus what they're paying, it's kind of like milk. And the only thing I can can compare it to is milk, because we used to sell milk by the 100 pounds, and then you put it, and by the time it got to the gallon of milk, which is 8 pounds, we should be making $50-$60 a pound, but we were only making 8. So
right.
Is that similar to what the cattle market is? And then of course you can bring in the outside stuff, the foreign meat market. What is it that what are we missing here? What the farmer's getting and versus actually but what the consumer's paying? What's the disconnect there?
So we've measured that in a number of ways. One way to measure that is the amount of the consumer beef dollar that the consumer pays for beef, how much of that goes back to the actual cattle producer. And back in the 90s, that was about 62 cents of every dollar a consumer purchased for beef. That 62 cents would go back to the actual American cattle farmer and rancher. Today, that is falling to about 42 cents. It's at a historic low. And today, the beef prices are at historic highs. So right now, the all-fresh beef value, that is taking a carcass and cutting it up into consumable beef products, the average price that the consumer pays for that is about $6 a pound. So if we go back to prior to when our lawsuit started about when we alleged the packers began engaging in unlawful activities to artificially depress prices, we go back to 2012, for example. And in that year, the difference between the cattle price and what consumers were paying was about $2.40 per pound. And that was when cattle prices were still connected to the value of beef. Today, that difference is about $5.75 a pound. And so there's been a huge jump in retail beef prices and a collapse in U.S. cattle prices that has created this broken market system. And so right now a producer let me address the issue of the bull bringing more than even a fed animal, which is very, very odd, except for the fact that we have been dependent upon cheaper beef from Australia and New Zealand, for example. And that beef is a very low-quality grinding product, and we import it into the United States, and then we mix that product with the higher-quality trim derived from our fed cattle, the animals that go through the feedlot and are fed grain. But this exceedingly lean meat that we're importing is essentially the same meat that we would be derived from cows and bulls. And farmers and ranchers will sell about 15 to 20% of their cows and bulls simply because they've exceeded their production lives or they didn't have a calf that year. And that's about 15 or 20% of their annual income. And so those cows and bulls were competing directly with this cheaper product coming out of Australia and New Zealand, and that was seriously depressing the price of cows and bulls in the United States. Well, now that we have this bottleneck in the system, and now that we have more consumers eating at home, they're eating a lot of ground beef. And so there's a shortage of ground beef, and so that's why the cull cow price and the bull price has finally brought the value of those animals up above the cost of production. Producers have been essentially giving their cows and bulls away, and that's 15 to 20% of their annual income. So they've been harmed for many, many years as a result of this undifferentiated, because when you buy the when you buy the ground beef in the grocery store, you think, well, this must be an American product, when it's most likely coming from Australia and New Zealand.
Okay.
That's why mandatory country of origin labeling.
You just blew my mind. I think that's of everything right there. You just explained it's like, why is this happening? And why is, and now it makes sense. Like, okay, why is that bull getting more money than an actual fed steer. Now you just explain the meat price, and that really, honestly, I mean, and this is coming from a farmer. I never understood this part because it's, I'm not a cattle rancher. So can you imagine somebody that, maybe has never stepped foot on a farm and having this explained to them in a way that it's like, okay, you just blew my mind.
Well, and here's why. In fact, you're absolutely right. America's cattle farmers and ranchers know very little about this. And that's because when the multinational meat packers started taking control over the industry, they also began taking control of the trade associations that were supposed to be representing the producers' interests. And so the meat packers figured out that if they could essentially infiltrate all of the producer organizations like the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, the National Pork Producers Council, the National Chicken Council, the National Turkey Federation, right now the meat packers are seated on every one of those so-called producer organizations' board, and they're dictating the message that those organizations are sending on to producers. And so this message, of course, benefits the meat packers. And here's what they've said about this. They've said imports do not hurt American cattle farmers and ranchers. In fact, they say the imports actually help the farmer and rancher because they complement our production processes. Because we don't produce this lean quality product, we need to get it from Australia and New Zealand. And we sell most of that product to the fast food chains like McDonald's and Burger King that buy a lot of ground beef. Mm-hmm. And that gives us the market for our higher priced and higher quality trim. Well, that's absolutely baloney. And we saw that in 2015 when cattle prices collapsed. We saw our imports from Australia quadruple. They quadrupled from, I think it was June of 2000. Well, it was between 2014 and 15, a fourfold increase in those imports, and that helped to collapse cattle prices because there was a sudden surge, and this was lean product. This was product that the industry has been telling producers, it doesn't compete against you, it complements you, when in fact the reality then showed producers, now wait a minute, this was a supply of beef that was a direct substitute to the supplies we have in the United States. And because it's considerably cheaper, it has driven down our prices. And so
I'm sitting here thinking, all right, well, that doesn't make, it's total, I could just, you were, before you even said it was BS, I knew it was BS, because if there was an actual market for lean cattle, whether it's bull or coal cows or anything like that, the meat part, the farmer would actually adjust. Oh, you want lean, you want bulls? I'll raise bulls.
Exactly.
You're asking for a specific product. I pride myself on giving you a nice big juicy, marbled steak. Oh, you don't want that? You want hamburger beef? Here's all day. But don't tell me that you're helping by importing from Australia and then, crashing my price on my marbled beef. That doesn't sit well.
Corey, and that's exactly why we have so few new entrants getting into. We don't have very many aspiring farmers and ranchers around this country. It's because the industry has been so suppressed by the dominance of these global multinational processing companies that we have farmers and ranchers telling their kids, don't come back to the farm or ranch. Go to college and do something else. You don't want to be caught in this downtrending cycle that we're in. And the reason that's occurring is because these multinational meat packers have established a system where they have now become dependent on this cheaper foreign beef. And so that limits the opportunities for aspiring farmers and ranchers. We need more cattle. We can produce more beef. Beef demand has been growing. But what's happening is the multinational meat packers are sourcing more cattle and more beef from foreign countries and eliminating the economic opportunity for a new entrant to come in and start to strengthen our cattle industry. So we've caught ourselves in a catch-22 situation where the current model is absolutely dependent on imports because that's the way the packers want it, and they don't want it to change. But that current model is why the average age of the American farmer and rancher is now up over 58 years of age. We have a real problem because we're going to lose.
We have a massive problem with that, and you can sit there and scream, and I'm an advocate of obviously, but until it actually hurts them in the pocketbook, or in our case, in another 20 years, there's not going to be anybody growing anything except large corporations, which then control all the food and control the price. And then where are we? Maybe this is just maybe a human race life cycle thing that we have to deal with. I don't have an answer. There's not a program out there. There's not a. How do you get into ranching? There's not a class you can take. There's not a trade school you can go to. This is something you're usually born and raised in.
Right. And the COVID-19, as you said before, this COVID-19 crisis has literally shown a floodlight on the deficiencies that of our food system, and it will now cause America to rethink and to rebuild a food system that will work, that will withstand this kind of a crisis. And that's where this presents opportunities to reshape the legal framework that our industry functions within, and to reshape the structure of the marketplace to meet the future needs of America. Because this virus, we have been concerned about a virus in the cattle industry for many, many years. It's called foot and mouth disease. It's the most contagious disease known to cloven-footed animals. That means an animal with two toes, like cattle, hogs, deer, sheep, and it doesn't differentiate or discriminate against wildlife. So that disease is rampant the world over. Very few continents are free of that disease. The United States, North America is free, Australia is free. South America, that disease is endemic, and it is highly contagious, more contagious perhaps than the COVID-19 because it can float by the wind for miles. It can be transferred by the meat product. In fact, in 1929, an Argentinian cruise ship docked in Los Angeles, California, and in the garbage and the hogs was the virus, and there was an outbreak. It was the last outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease in the United States. Occurred in 1929. The United States spent millions of dollars depopulating wildlife and cattle in the area to stop and eliminate. So we have always had a ban on importing beef from countries where foot-and-mouth disease occurred because it's devastating to the cattle industry. And that included Argentina, Brazil, China, Russia. Most of the world has this pernicious disease. Well, in concert with their efforts to facilitate more imports, our U.S. Department of Agriculture has been systematically relaxing our health and safety restrictions, and they're actually encouraging imports from countries where this disease is known to be endemic, including Brazil, including Argentina. Uruguay has had tremendous problems with this, and now we're putting our U.S. cattle industry at risk because we have relaxed the protections to prevent this foreign animal disease from entering the United States. And to make matters worse, in their infinite wisdom, Congress decided to move a Level 4 Biosecurity Laboratory that has been off the coast of New York and Plum Island for decades, and there they do research on very contagious diseases like foot and mouth disease. But because it's an island, Plum Island, if an outbreak occurs, and it has there, the virus simply goes off over the Atlantic Ocean. Well, they have now decided to move that facility into the heart of the beef country, where approximately 75% of our beef production is done, because that's where the multinational meat packers have centralized, and where approximately 80% of all of our cattle feeding is done. In Manhattan, Kansas, they are now going to bring the live foot and mouth disease virus and conduct research on it right in the middle of America. And nothing could be more risky than that kind of a venture. So our industry has been concerned that we could have had and could still have an outbreak of foot and mouth disease that would be more contagious for our cattle than the COVID-19 virus is presently for humans. That's scary, and that's stupid for the United States Congress to have approved that. And we're hopeful that this, because the USDA said, well, we're confident we can control it if it ever broke out. Well, the COVID-19 shows that whatever level of confidence you had, it was absolutely incorrect. We were incapable. We were ill-prepared to address this COVID-19, just as we are ill-prepared to address an outbreak of foot and mouth disease.
When you bring in actual farming problems into a room, and you being you're kind of into the politics now of it. You get into a room full of politicians, and they just look at you with that. They're thinking about how they can just get you to go away. They're not here to listen to you because they don't understand what you're saying. And then you have people write checks and bankrolling their reelection campaigns and whatnot. It's a tough. Politics is just really gross. I don't like it. It's a double-edged sword. I enjoy it, but I also am not very good at it because I'm a black and white guy, and politics is you flip back and forth. Oh, there he is. We dropped him. See, this is why I have a co-host.
Yay!
Bill went away. Oh, he dropped it. His call dropped. No. Well, anyway, I didn't understand the beef thing where the bulls and the cow cows and the dairy cows and those kind of things went to hamburger. I mean, I guess I did understand it, but I didn't understand there was a whole marketplace for that.
I didn't understand that either. I mean, I don't know.
Hold on just a second.
Corey, am I back on?
Yes, you are, sir.
Okay.
I was just telling Beth, I said, this is why I needed a co-host. There was a couple episodes I did where I was a good 3 minutes of dead air, and I was talking to myself, and I said, I need a co-host. I need somebody to bounce some stuff off of, and then you dropped off, and I'm like, this is why we have a co-host.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened, but I was.
Yeah, you just dropped. You just dropped.
Huh.
So Beth was saying, we were talking about the hamburger issue and whatnot. Just how that was a interesting for me. It was the interesting part about it is, even though I knew that went to hamburger, I didn't understand. I guess I understood that some of that, like the bulls and the dairy cattle, went into ground beef, and then they just made up the rest with scraps and whatnot. But really, it's an actual industry that. There's a certain grade of cattle that just is hamburger. But that was when I was younger, so I really haven't really thought about it, I guess.
Well, Corey, you were talking about how challenging, that's a nice way to put it, it is to try to convince Congress to do what's good for America. And, of course, we've been at this for 20 years, and much of what we've asked for has fallen on deaf ears. Every once in a while, we are able to break through. And the reason we were able to break through is because we had a widespread support from consumers. So we're trying to replicate that now with our country of origin labeling campaign, because consumers understand this issue. They know they want to be able to choose where their food comes from. And if we can get them mobilized all together on a petition with 100,000 consumers, we bring that to Congress and they will listen. The president will listen. So that's the strategy. We realize we can't go up against these multinational corporations who have teams of lobbyists who have essentially won the day for many, many years. Things can turn around if we can mobilize citizens, and that's what this campaign effort is underway, and that's why we have a number of reforms for the cattle industry. And I haven't brought any of those up during this discussion, other than the historic lawsuit we filed to enforce our antitrust laws, because we need to do something monumental as a first step. And restoring the ability of consumers to choose where they buy their food, and restoring the ability of the American cattle producers to compete in their own marketplace is a first huge step. And that's why we're pushing so hard on that right now. And I think that can help us overcome the impenetrable wall built by these globalized multinational corporations and their teams of lobbyists.
I think I said it in the beginning, was I think this COVID-19 is going to help you in your organization push these topics, because the market is definitely going to be upended. Prices are going to skyrocket, and everybody's going to be pointing the finger on why. And then that's when you step in and go, this is exactly why. And you're going to be able to get you're going to grab these people, and they're going to be, hey, why are you grabbing my ear? Because I want you to listen to me. And this is what we need to do to change this. And it's going to take another 20 years of change, and not allowing them back to importing these, lesser grade, meats in produce. And it doesn't matter. It goes along our whole food chain. They're importing cheaper products and cutting out American, jobs and farmers. So, hey, Bill, I've got the Demand USA Beef. Is that .com?
Yes.
Or is that
DemandUSABeef.com. And the other one is.
And I've already signed a petition.
Wonderful. Circulate it far and wide.
There was another one you said?
Yes. The other one is to connect consumers to producers who can sell beef directly to them, and even to small processors. And that's www.usabeef.org. So one is DemandUSABeef.com. The other one is usabeef.org.
I saw a guy on Facebook that he was a buffalo producer in Colorado, and he was frantically he was saying, look, I got to sell 20 buffalo a month to stay viable. All of my restaurants haven't ordered anything, and I need to sell, in order to keep this thing going, I have to sell 20 buffalo a month. And that was my restaurant orders.
Right.
So he's going through the same backlog. He's used to pushing out 20 buffalo. Well, all of a sudden that chain stopped. So now he's backed up. It's so, and I just bring that up because it's the same thing as what we're talking about. But usabeef.org, if you want to order beef, you can go to that website and purchase beef, right?
Yep, they can connect with an actual producer. So all the negotiation would be between the consumer and the producer. We just provided the platform where they can meet each other.
Ooh, I really like that. I'm going to have to check that out. I think that's, I know I have a lot of friends on, social media, and they, some of them grow their own, and some of them, they go in, 3 of them will go in on a cow, and 1 of them will raise it, and then they have but this gives me, I got to check that out, because that might be an option to do that.
Absolutely.
We got a couple minutes left. Bill, I really appreciate you taking the time, and you've been on for an hour now, and I just really appreciate everything that you're doing, and I wholeheartedly support you, and it's been great having you on. You're definitely a cowboy.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having us.
No
we appreciate having you on our side.
Bill, you still there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I make sure I put all these links into the podcast and into anything that I do to promote this. If you have any other, if you need me to get anything more information out, just you know how to get a hold of me, and I'll do my best.
Well, thank you very much. Sure appreciate it.
No problem, Bill. You have a good one, okay?
You too. Thank you. Bye, Corey.
You're welcome, sir. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. That was Bill Bullard. He's the chief executive officer of RCAF USA. There's a couple of domains that I'll be posting up on here. Well, what'd you think, Beth?
Very interesting, very informative. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody out there is going to learn a lot as well.
The podcasts are interesting.
And they need to sign the petition.
They need to sign the petitions. Podcasts are interesting, I got to tell you. We got 7 seconds left. We are flaming out just graciously. Have a great day, and I'll talk at you soon. Thanks.